What if the power to manipulate time was never truly ours? From sundials carved into stone to atomic clocks humming in sealed laboratories, we have counted time with priestly care, hoping that precision might become power. We sketch timelines like rails in a museum, past behind us, future in front, the present a single bright carriage. Yet the world keeps offering heresies. A mountain bends time with its mass. A fast-flying particle grows old more slowly than its twin. Memory rearranges what it swears it witnessed. And somewhere, perhaps far beyond our telescopes, there are minds for whom these heresies are not curiosities but tools, minds that tend to time the way gardeners tend to rivers, cutting channels, building weirs, letting one branch flood while another runs dry. What if every story we told about time machines and paradoxes was a shadow on the wall of a much larger chamber, one in which time is curated by beings older than our continents, subtler than our physics, and closer than we dare imagine? Could time be a fabric woven by alien hands? We call it a dimension, they might call it a medium. We picture an arrow, they might traffic in tapestries. Relativity teaches that time dilates with motion and mass, that clocks disagree because the universe is generous with perspectives. Quantum theory suggests a jitter in events, a statistical shiver at the base of reality where certainties soften into likelihoods. We have treated these as properties to be measured. But suppose they are permissions, flexibilities in the weave that artisans can exploit? Imagine an apparatus the size of a star cluster and the delicacy of a spider web, tuned to gravity's faintest chord. Imagine engineers who can pinch the manifold so two distant centuries kiss, or who can emboss the fabric with a faint pattern that later minds will call fate. Not magic, not miracle, but technique, an industry of chronology foremen and archivists, conservators and censors, maintaining the canon of history as carefully as we restore a fresco. Would history itself be a carefully curated illusion? Perhaps history is to the custodians what edition is to a publisher. First drafts teem with errors, contradictions, dead ends. You prune, rewrite, reorder chapters, nudge a sentence here, replace a paragraph there, until the story flows. To us, the narrative of the past feels inevitable because it has been made to be. A plague which almost burned through a continent is remembered instead as a near miss. A war that would have ended in ashes concludes in negotiation after a single assassination fails at the last second. A scientist who might have died at sea lives, and the calculus of an entire century pivots on the papers he later writes by candlelight. And yet curation leaves fingerprints. The text bears watermarks. The margin shows ghostly erasures. We call them coincidences, flukes, strokes of fortune or fate. They are perhaps neither. They are the brushstrokes of editors who work in days and dynasties instead of verbs and commas. Are déjà vu and dreams fragments of tampered timelines? You are pouring tea, and a scent, a shadow, the angle of a wrist, blows a fuse in your certainty. You have done this before. You know, absurdly, what will fall from the shelf. The moment passes and you shake your head. What if the feeling is not nonsense but an overlap, an interference pattern where the discarded cut of the scene still hums in your nervous system? A minor correction 10 years ago, a messenger delayed by a single hour, a fever that broke instead of climbing, the custodians pull one thread from the sweater of causality and knit another, and your brain, which is chemistry but also archive, remembers both. Dreams then become the cinema of abandoned edits. You wake, heart racing from a life you never lived, a city you never visited, a grief you never earned. The plots are strange because the source was never you. They are salvaged from orphan timelines, a nightly leak of stories through the insulation of sleep. Do myths of gods reflect alien timekeepers? Kronos swallowing suns, Shiva dancing the universe to dust, then breathing it back into rhythm, the fates measuring, weaving, cutting, the Mayan calendars cycling ages through numbers that feel like spells. Perhaps our ancestors met a technology so deft it behaved like deity and did what all good storytellers do when confronted with the incomprehensible. They personified it. The gods did not live on mountains, they lived between instants, arriving in thunder that was simply our atmosphere complaining about a localized fold. The first astronomer priests learned to predict eclipses and were worshipped for it. What would a culture do with visitors who could predict revolutions? Who could say, "Do not found your city there, in 8 generations the ground will open," and then, when persuaded, show the city a safer river? Religion, myth, ritual, these become interoperable languages for surviving correspondence with custodians who prefer parable to disclosure. Why do UFO encounters often defy time? Missing hours. Watches that stop and reawaken exactly synchronized. People who return from a night beside a country road with the conviction that weeks have passed, their hair grown, their scars grown smooth. We have framed such stories as a theater of abduction, a moral panic, an industrial folklore. And perhaps some are. But time anomalies cling to these narratives like burrs. Lights do not merely move, they skip. Sounds do not merely swell, they stretch. The mind does not merely fear, it floats, as if buoyed in the thickened syrup of altered seconds. Suppose the vehicles are not traveling through our space so much as through our sequence, stitching across the ledger of events to arrive where an intervention is scheduled. To the crew, the mission is routine. To a witness, the air buckles, the radio laughs, the cows stand in attitudes that make no sense, and the moon is 2 finger widths from where it belongs. If so, then what we call aliens might be less interested in Earth as a place, and more interested in Earth as a moment. A planet is a location. A culture is a trajectory. To shepherds of time, the coordinates that matter are not latitude and longitude but hinge points, junctions where a tiny push yields centuries of safety, or ruin. They visit not the coordinates of Paris or Quito but of Harvest 1793 or Spring 2041, the afternoon a premier's convoy stalls 3 blocks shy of a bridge, the morning a lab assistant notices a contamination that will one day be called medicine. They arrive where the slope is steepest and lean with 2 fingers until the civilization below slides into a different valley. Do the beings control history to protect us, or themselves? Benevolence is a pleasant hypothesis. It flatters us to imagine guardians who want us alive. But self-interest is older than charity. Picture a war not fought across star lanes but across centuries, a conflict in which victory means ensuring your foe never comes into being. 2 lineages of custodians fork in some forgotten preface, each revises the text, erasing the lineage of the other wherever it begins to form. In such warfare, a small species on a blue planet might be a keystone or a pawn. Keep them thriving because their later music becomes the code that unlocks a weapon. Keep them weak because a leader in their 24th century births a rival intelligence. Keep them oscillating because a steady amplitude in their climate destabilizes the lattice you use for travel. If we are curated, it may be because we are precious, or because we are perilous. Could Mandela effects be traces of rewritten timelines? People swear a logo once had a hyphen, that a Bear family spelled its name with an E not an A, that a statesman died on a date he did not. They argue online with zeal that sounds like grief. Memory is fallible, yes, but it is also communal. When millions misremember the same minor fact, the explanation faulty memory feels scientifically neat and spiritually thin. What else might produce a chorus of almosts? If edits to history must respect certain conservation laws, if, for example, energy and causality must balance across revisions, then not every trace can be scrubbed. Residuals remain, tiny mismatches in branding, poems whose scansions no longer fit, books whose morals feel jarringly off for the era that produced them. The Mandela effect becomes not a punchline but a watermark, a pattern of errors that, if mapped carefully across centuries and languages, might reveal the editor's hand. How would humanity change if we learned the truth? Picture the press conference that ends childhood. Probes from the Kuiper Cliff begin returning telemetry that contradicts ephemerides by a hair, and then by a mile. A consortium of observatories releases data from clocks scattered like breadcrumbs across Earth's crust. They have been drifting in a pattern that is not geophysics. The message drops: time is under stewardship. Not ours. No negotiation offered, only a public service announcement from the custodians, spoken in the voice of your grandmother because the system knows what calms you. Do markets crash? Do priests weep? Do children sleep better? Some will say, at last, someone competent is in charge. Others will rage, no one asked us. Lawyers will sue on behalf of ancestors revised out of existence. Activists will demand democratic control over edits that erase entire ways of life. A new theology will flower overnight that insists free will was never freedom from influence but freedom within a composed score. Skeptics will deny even as clocks curve in their pockets. The world will divide not into believers and unbelievers but into those who want the realm curated and those who want it raw, even if raw means ruin. If time is controlled, do we truly have free will, or are we actors in a script that's rewritten whenever the custodians desire? Determinism has always been the thorn in liberty's side. Frozen fate on one hand, chaotic accident on the other. The custodians introduce a third discomfort: editorial determinism. The play was improvised, yes, but the director recut it after the fact to produce an arc that serves a purpose. You spoke your lines freely, Then your lines were folded into a version of the performance that leads to Act 5. We recoil, and yet this is how memory works already. Each time you recall a day, you rewrite it, smoothing its edges to fit who you are now. The self is an anthology with additions. Perhaps the universe is, too. Perhaps free will is the capacity to improvise between edits. Meaning survives not because the script is pure but because your performance illuminates whatever script arrives. That is a thread some will cling to with white knuckles when the announcement comes. Could our future already be known? Known is not the same as fixed. To a being outside our sequence, the trail is visible end to end. That is knowledge. But the custodians, if they are engineers more than oracles, may know futures the way a meteorologist knows weather, by modeling and pruning, by foreclosing paths with small pressures until the desired climate emerges. In such a world, the phrase already happened loses romance and acquires procedure. The future is a space of recipes, some locked, some open, many contingent. If you were told, gently and with illustrative graphs, that 5 of your possible deaths have been retired for reasons of conservation and aesthetics, would you grieve the lost branches or thank the curators for the one you are walking? If you learn that a love you cherish exists because a subtle fix prevented a ship delay one spring, would you call it interference or grace? What if some humans already know? The world leaks. Secrets sweat through cloth. The story persists that a naval experiment smeared a ship across the harbor and the calendar, that a facility on Long Island tuned a transmitter and caught the echo of tomorrow, that a ring of magnets in Europe hums and the dice of destiny rattle louder in their cup. Most such tales dissolve on contact with daylight. A few refuse to die, not because they are true, but because something nearby is. If the custodians require local agents, interpreters, auditors, archivists, then some among us have been reading edits in real time for generations. They would not be wizards, they would be bookkeepers. Accountants of days authorized to move decimal points if told to by an authority no court recognizes. Their tools would be banal, actuaries' tables, epidemiological models, random number generators that are not random if you know whose hand is on the seed. Their burden would be terrible, to keep history legible while it is being revised around them. If that class exists, it has its own liturgy, its own shames, its own catastrophes. Somewhere there is a cemetery for people who died twice. Could we ever fight back? Before rebellion, there must be recognition. If humanity wishes to contest the edit, we need instrumentation that detects the cut. Clocks are the first weapon. Scatter them at gravity wells, deep mines, mountain tops, lunar farside, Martian canyons, Kuiper Cliff, Oort mist. Synchronize. Then listen. When synchronization fails in a way the equations cannot bear, something touched the weave. Next, statistics. If causality is rewritten, correlations will shiver. Run forecasts in sealed vaults, compare them with outcomes in the wild. Hunt for discrepancies too coordinated to be chance. Then there is art. Poets, composers, mathematicians, all trained to feel symmetry and rupture, can serve as seismographs. Commission works in cycles, serialize them across cities, and record the spontaneous variations. Where time is thin, meaning misbehaves. There will be glitches the curators cannot perfectly sand. Through these, a resistance could grow, not to destroy the custodian's loom, but to negotiate. Rebellions begin with leverage, our leverage would be evidence. Bring the watermarks into the open, force a conversation. Would the custodians notice, and care? Perhaps attention is what they wanted all along. A species does not mature until it realizes it lives in a story told by forces beyond it. Contact may require not rockets but literacy. If so, then the experiments are not weapons but letters. We have learned to see your edits, may we speak? The answer might arrive as a morning in which everyone on Earth remembers the same dream, a room without corners, a voice without source, an explanation without threat. Or it might arrive as a formula seated in the mind of a graduate student in Dakar, a method for local timecraft that allows a village to bank its own harvest against the drought the curators cannot avert without breaking everything else. Or is time travel a gift, not a prison? There is a gentler reading still. Time left unattended may unravel. Civilizations that pry too hard may tear the fabric and fall through. The custodians might be gardeners after all, pruning not for power but for health, saving us from the catastrophes we cannot yet avoid and from the curiosities we cannot yet safely satisfy. They are not canceling our freedom, they are catching our falling cups before they shatter the only kitchen any of us share. Every déjà vu becomes a bullet diverted. Every missing hour becomes a pileup unwritten. Every Mandela effect becomes a warning label on the jar: do not open this flavor of history. It contains glass. If that is true, gratitude is our wisest rebellion. Learn the grammar of edits. Ask to be taught. Become, in time, apprentices in the craft that saved us. One day, we might be invited to help hold the loom. What would apprenticeship to the custodians look like? Education would change. Children would learn not only arithmetic and history but their entanglement. This is the battle we remember. Here are 3 the custodians tried first. This is why they chose the one you carry. Ethics would change. Consent would expand to include the unborn. Do not choose a fix that robs a future of its chance to form descent. Architecture would change. Cities would be designed with temporal slack, places where edits can settle without toppling hospitals or breaking hearts. Holidays would mark not only births and deaths but rewrites that spared millions who do not know they were spared. A new profession would bloom: historians licensed to lobby. They would petition on behalf of lost branches, cultures that almost were, music that almost existed, languages that died in drafts. And the custodians, half moved and half amused by our stubborn thrift, would sometimes grant the petition, letting an echo through, a motif in an anthem, a spice in a cuisine, a word in a prayer that does not belong where it appears and fits perfectly anyway. What if the custodians are not singular? Unity is our projection. We imagine a council because councils are what we know. But custodians could name a diversity as vast as ecology: conservators who prefer minimal intervention, tacticians who like bold cuts, archivists who hoard branches, artists who compose histories as symphonies, ethicists who count suffering across versions like actuaries. Their debates might ring like weather across eons, and we are the rain. If factions exist, then Earth may be a coalition project or a contested one. Edits that feel capricious could be compromises. Hard years may be the price of not being extinguished by a more ruthless school. When you sense the universe hesitate, as if the script forgets what comes next, it may be because the custodians are arguing. How might they travel? Not in chrome cones blinking with lights, but in gradients. They would ride curvature the way surfers ride storm lines. A craft might be a patch of softened causality, a bubble in which sequence is negotiable. Inside, instruments are not dials but dialogues with the manifold. Outside, to our eyes, the bubble moves by relocating its relationship to before and after rather than to here and there. A vehicle passes through a war like a hand through smoke, stealing only a day from the general's calendar, and the battle's tide turns as if it were always meant to. If our detectors are to see them, we must look less for metal and more for manners: fields where entropy briefly runs uphill, zones where radioactive decay forgets its schedule, forests where tree rings miss a year although the wolves remember the snow. What would proof look like? A global experiment in which a sealed set of random seeds, hashed and notarized by rival governments, yields different sequences after a specific celestial alignment, reproducibly, politely, as if someone signed the sky. A glacier that calves in a pattern previously encoded in a poem published 50 years earlier by an unknown miner in Yakutia whose notebook later tests clean of forgery and whose bloodline includes no mystics, only careful men. A multinational team of chronobiologists who, after 5 years of measuring the micro-jitters of human circadian rhythms, finds a daily pulse no tide explains, a whisper of metronomes being tapped by someone who likes their symphonies subtly in sync. Could we build our own local sovereignty in time? Perhaps the custodians would allow it if we asked well. A city might request a charter, the right to bank a surplus of seconds in a reservoir for emergencies, let ambulances drive in borrowed afternoons while the parks repay the debt through slightly longer twilights in winter. A nation might negotiate the rollback of a chemical spill at the cost of accepting a different election outcome that reduces the likelihood of the same mistake. Families might be permitted a micro-edit per generation, administered by a civic body with witnesses and songs. Abuses would happen. Regrets would multiply. Wisdom would grow, the knowledge that even good edits cast shadows long and thin, that the cleanest fix is often to change what we are in the present rather than what we were in the past. Could we ever be invited to the loom? Apprenticeship requires humility, patience, and the willingness to be corrected. But we have practiced these. We learn to fly by listening to wind. We learn to heal by listening to bodies. We can learn to tend time by listening to consequence. When our instruments hum at last with evidence that we are being edited, we can choose outrage or outreach. Outrage makes us loud, outreach makes us legible. If the custodians are guardians, they will answer. If they are tyrants, they will reveal themselves as such, and the ethics of resistance will clarify. Either way, the knowledge makes us larger. A species that knows it lives in a curated chronology must learn deeper forms of responsibility. We will teach our children the art of living well in edited worlds, keep promises that survive revisions, love in ways that persist across branches, build institutions that do not depend on a single outcome to be just. And if they never answer? Then we continue the work anyway. We design clocks, poems, treaties, and telescopes that can stand in crosswinds. We create redundancies not because we despair, but because redundancy is what care looks like in a universe that sometimes changes its mind. We tell each other stories that hold shape when a paragraph is cut. We make music whose beauty survives a missing bar. We practice a faith not in guardians, but in each other, which is what guardians would most want us to learn. Closing movement, the prayer of the unedited. What if time travel is controlled by beings from another galaxy? Then our lives are both smaller and greater than we imagined. Smaller, because we are not sole authors. Greater, because we are collaborators in a work vast enough to need editors. Every second you live may already be written. Every second you live rewrites it anyway, because living is what gives the draft its meaning. Perhaps one day, the sky will fold like cloth and a voice will say, "We chose this timeline because in this one you learn to be kind." Or we will die as all mortals do, never knowing, and kindness will have been the right answer regardless. Until that day, if it comes, lean into the déjà vu without superstition, tend your dreams as libraries, listen for the rhythm in the noise, and keep a small, sturdy hope that somewhere beyond our maps there are artisans of ours who, for reasons we may never grasp, have kept us, again and again, in the version where we endure.